But let's turn back to taxes for one more moment. Joining me from Capitol Hill is Colorado Democratic Senator Michael Bennet. Senator, thanks for joining us.
I'm on my phone. No, I'm just kidding. Thanks for having me.
That was good. That was good. I didn't realize you were a jokester, but now I know.
I had a lot of time to think about it.
I'm sorry. Hold on. My phone's ringing, and I'm kidding.
I gotta go.
Let's get to taxes, okay. Senator. The Republicans think that they have enough to get this passed. Who are you, as the Democrats, lobbying right now on the Republican side of the aisle to get them to think twice?
Well, I think anybody who's ever said they were committed to fiscal responsibility and dealing with our deficit should be somebody who's vulnerable to voting the other way, because this bill blows such a huge hole in the deficit. But I think, Katy, you did a great job laying out the facts in this bill. Let me add one more to what you said. There are 572,000 Americans who are lucky enough to make more than $1 million a year, 572,000. They are getting $34 billion in this tax bill. There are 90 million Americans that make $50,000 and below. And in 2019, the best year, because as you pointed out, over time things get worse and worse. In 2019, they're getting collectively $14 billion, which is equivalent to $160 a person, or $7.50 a paycheck. It is a joke that these guys are saying this is a middle-class tax cut, and we need to make sure the American people understand it so we can defeat it. So I don't know precisely who it's going to be, but surely there are two Republicans that can see through the rhetoric and vote against this bill so that we can actually get to a bipartisan solution that works for the middle class and doesn't blow a huge hole in our deficit.
What about those in your caucus who hail from states that Donald Trump won by a landslide? I'm looking at Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, for one, from West Virginia.
Let me tell you something. I've got a lot of rural counties in my state where Donald Trump won 80% of the vote. And I am pleased to have the chance to go back there and tell them why I didn't vote for a tax bill that gave massive tax breaks to the wealthiest people in America and financed it by borrowing the money from the children of people living in those districts that are going to have no benefit of the taxes that they paid. People that voted for Donald Trump thought he was going to help what Donald Trump called the forgotten person, not that he was going to bestow, these gifts on the very wealthiest people in America, but that's what this bill does.
Senator, the Democrats did not show up to a meeting with the president yesterday. Chuck and Nancy didn't show up to that after lunch meeting, and the White House made a show of it. They left those chairs empty. Do you think that that's the right thing to do, for no matter how you feel about the president, to not show up to try and negotiate a deal that would keep the government open?
Well, I think that no matter how people feel about anybody, we've all got a job to do here, and I think they did what they thought they had to do to get leverage in a negotiation. But where people in Colorado have become incredibly impatient with politicians in Washington is that we don't ever seem to actually get a deal done, to get a transaction closed. And that's what we have to do. And in this context, by the way, this is one more, we're not even talking about a real budget. We're talking about a ridiculous temporary budget called a continuing resolution, 30 of which have been passed in the 9 years that I've been in the Senate. I have never seen a real budget passed here. I've never seen real appropriations process followed. And as long as this is the way we're going to do things, Congress is going to continue to have a 9% approval rate.
Yeah, and so that's my question. If the Democrats, if Donald Trump is calling the Democrats obstructionists, and the Democrats don't show up to a meeting, are you risking feeding into that perception and only alienating more of the moderate or the independent-minded people in the electorate who are not tied to any one party, to make them feel like Congress is really just not out there for them?
Look, I think it is really important for us to somehow figure out a way to commit in a bipartisan way to making these institutions work again for America. They don't work. I mean, we are in the middle of dismantling these really elegant institutions that the founders built for us to resolve our disputes, because we're not resolving disputes. All we are doing is having disputes. And that's not good for the American people. It's not good for the next generation of Americans. And it's not good for America's standing in the world. And so my hope is that we will get this very small budget issue dealt with, and at the same time do some very important work like around DACA and the Dreamers that has to get done before the end of this year. In fact, we should be working on that right now. Instead of claiming a tax bill that has nothing to do with the middle class as somehow a middle class tax cut, or that people should appreciate the fact that some crumbs are going to somehow magically trickle down, to mix a metaphor.
Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, mixed metaphor purveyor and also underground comic. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
See you.
And next up.